Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anvarika Charibag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology in India. Today we are going to discuss the module on class debate in India. This module has been written by Surangana Ghosh, Research Scholar, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. In this module, we are going to discuss on rural and urban class structure. We will also have a discussion on middle classes in India. But for students who are more interested in middle class, they are requested to see the module on middle class and globalization. In this module on class debate in India, we will also discuss on working class and also put a little light on working class movements in India. And finally, we will also discuss the debate between the class and class conflict, especially in terms of caste conflict in India. Objectives: to understand the complex nature of class structure in India within and outside the parlance of economic understanding, to understand the changing nature of class structure influenced by omnipresence of caste system in India. Scholars from different disciplines like economics, sociology, media studies, political science, socio-cultural anthropology are fascinated by the term class, determined primarily as economic categories and emerging as outcomes due to amalgamation of various socio-cultural phenomena. Sociologists have drawn heavily upon Karl Marx and Max Weber in order to have a proper understanding of the term class. According to Gupta, literature on class structure of India is not as extensive as the literature available on the caste system. The inherent fact is embedded with the applicability of class as a relevant construct in post-colonial India, where there also exists an intertwined relationship between caste and class. Methodologies to establish class boundaries not only differ but also vary around the socially significant definitional concepts like education, income, occupation and culture in India. Rather than being paradigmatic in its approach, this module attempts to have an overall understanding of the nature and actual practice of class structure in India. The module has 6 sections. Section 1 deals with the analysis of the rural class structure of India. Section 2 on the urban class in India. Section 3 examines the complexities of middle classes. Section 4 discusses the working class and the working class movement. Section 5 focuses on the debates on the backward classes and the backward class movement in India. And Section 6 analyzes the complex class and caste conflict in India. Section 1. Rural class structure. In the rural community in India, the rank order can be described in terms of agrarian production and relations of different social strata to property, depending upon the quality of agricultural land and infrastructure for cultivating it. In agrarian areas, the following are the 7 principal classes that have emerged during the British rule, as argued by Desai. Zamindars created by the British government, absentee landlords, tenants under zamindars and absentee landlords, the class of peasant proprietors divided into upper, middle and lower strata, agricultural laborer, modern class of merchants and the modern class of money lenders. Here Desai in his book The Social Background of Indian Nationalism has had a detailed discussion on the nature and growth of this class. According to him, these are the classes that have come into existence as a result of basic economic transformation brought about by various acts of the British government, the penetration of the Indian society by commercial and other forces from outside the capitalist world and the establishment of modern industries in India, the introduction of private property in land in the form of zamindari and raitwari systems by the British government brought into being new classes of large estates owners, the zamindars and peasant proprietors, the creation of right to lease land brought into being such classes as tenants and subtenants, and the creation of the right to purchase and sell land together with the right to hire and employ labor on land created conditions for the growth of class of absentee landlords and that of agricultural proletariat. Along with the class of zamindars, tenants, peasant proprietors and land laborers that developed in the agrarian area on increasing scale, such groups such as modern money lenders and merchants. The above mentioned classes and groups were unknown in the pre-British society. The other classes in money lenders and merchants existed in rural areas in the pre-British India. The function and position in the old economy were substantially different from those in the modern new economy. The classes of modern merchants and money lenders in agrarian areas might be described as the new classes linked up with new capitalist economy and performing functions quite different from those which they had performed in the social economy of the medieval pre-British Indian society. The modern commercial bourgeois was also a new evolution. A.R. Desai has stated that the farming community of an average Indian village is found to be composed of several strata of cultivators highly differentiated from each other in respect of the size of land owned or cultivated, number of drought and cattle possessed, nature and amount of capital invested in the farming, types of tools and implements used, amount of family or hired labor employed, techniques of cultivation practice, extent of surplus produced and sold in the market, amount amount of grain or loss from farming business and the volume of savings or deficits made. According to Gadgil, it is often said that the economic power in the countryside today is exercised chiefly by two elements. First of these is represented by the trader moneylender class, who chiefly profit from all opportunities of gain connected with the finance of agricultural production and with trading in the countryside. This element is connected chiefly with the urban trading and financial communities and act as the representative in the countryside. The other element is that of the substantial landlords and farmers. These are ordinary holders of land as also cultivators of it on a comparatively large scale. They usually wield considerable political and social power. In some instances, the two elements would have much in common and may act together closely, as argued by Desai. Thorner, on the other hand, stated that on the basis of the network of relationship among various groups of persons who draw their livelihood from land, the impact of this relationship on the economy and the relationship of different classes in relation to one another, one can find wide regional variation within agrarian structure. But in general, the agrarian structure in India is composed of three principal groups: Maliks, proprietors, Kisan, working peasants, and Mazdoor, laborers. Such bifurcation is based on the amount of actual labor contributed to the production process, the share in the product, and the extent to which income is received despite lack of participation in agriculture. Further, the class is generally associated with particular castes. Thus, the Maliks are generally the Brahmin, Thakur, and other high-ranking caste or members of respectable cultivating castes such as Kammas, Kredis, Raos, Marathas, whereas the Kisans are generally the cultivating and artisan castes, and the Mazdoor include the Dalit, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, especially the oppressed backward classes. Dhanagre argued that within the agrarian social structure in India, one can observe the coexistence of agrarian classes and status. Thus, the group of non-economic nature in the most fundamental fact of Indian agrarian structure, where the status group bound men by an essentially non-economic sentiment or an identity, frequently serve to sustain subjugation and exploitation of those in lower strata. In India, these structural linkages and anchorages tended to maintain the status quo, and the peasants have often revolted against the unequal structures. Chadha and Sahu state that an analysis of the all-India pattern of casualization of rural employment for both male and female workers indicates a substantial worsening of the employment situation within agriculture and rural India, thereby highlighting the declining incidence of self-employment within agricultural workforce. Thus, due to the increasing process of differentiation among agricultural population, the class of agricultural wage laborers grew rapidly. These classes of people would fall under the category of below poverty line (BPL) and generally experience high levels of vulnerability. Section 2. Urban class structure. Urban industrial social stratification is predominantly characterized by professional and working class. Professionalism requires the need of training in order to acquire skills for performing specific kinds of labor and work. Professional classes reflect social and structural differentiation in the fields of occupation, industry, and economy. Emergence of professional classes focuses on the prominence of social mobility in the persisting social stratification. Urban industrial social stratification consists of the following classes: upper class, upper middle class, lower middle class, working class. These classes are generally formed on the basis of income and occupation. It might be difficult to know the real income from the apparent occupational status. Studies of urban industrial social stratification in India have been initiated as a reaction to the studies of rural agrarian relations, migration from rural to urban areas, social mobility, and increasing number of urban industrial towns. Based on an understanding of the discussion A.R. Desai had made in his book Social Background of Indian Nationalism, urban class structure can be divided mainly into four groups: the modern class of capitalists, industrial, commercial, and financial; the modern working class engaged in mining and other enterprise; the class of petty traders and shopkeepers bound up with modern capitalist economy; the professional classes such as technicians, doctors, lawyers, professors, journalists, managers, clerks, others, comprising of the intelligentsia and the educated middle class. The modern capitalist class grew rapidly between 1914 to 1947, a period close to India's independence, and on the whole was not tied up with pre-imperialist feudal interests either economically or politically. According to Desai, along with the advent of railways, accumulation of profit in the hands of the Indian trading class, a new class of industrial bourgeois in the country emerged, such as mill owners, mine owners, and owners of other capitalist enterprises. Desai claimed that along with the growth of these modern industries in India, there emerged the working class such as factory workers, mine workers, railway workers, etc. These working class is highly stratified within itself in the context of the structures of caste, ethnicity and gender, which initially had prevented this class from developing a general homogeneous class consciousness. Desai argued that during the British period, the need for establishment of new commercial enterprises and administrative system prompted the British government to initiate modern education. This resulted in the growth of modern professional classes like managers, clerks, engineers, technologists, journalists, etc. This modern professional class socially became an integral part of the new capitalist society in urban India. In addition to these social classes, there existed a big class of petty traders and shopkeepers, contributing to the growth of modern towns and cities in urban India. Section 3. Middle classes in India. Middle classes in India are a product of both capitalist development and the state. Higher technical education provides a passport for higher status, lucrative job, but interestingly, there is a marked lack of homogeneity among different middle classes. In fact, structural distinctions are quite marked even between the apparently equal and homogeneous classes. These people identifying as middle class do not form a class for itself, neither do they form a socially cohesive layer in economic relations, argues Savala. In India, the new middle classes are separate from the old middle class in terms of differences in the lifestyle. The old middle class family in India is related with a class of wealthy merchants and professionals who traditionally have a long family history of being related to organizations, mainly the government and other public employers. It is noted that these middle classes are neither laborers nor their elite. Their existence is in between. They depend on the political and economic elite for the conditions of existence. These middle classes are caught up in the trap of acquiring more and more educational qualifications which help them in the transformations of enhanced status. So the new middle class life centers on the notion of social value and practices of those values. It seems that middle class is ever expanding. Continuous inflow of groups entering this class due to reservations, subsidies and education result in differing habitus and their economic rise throughout. Adhering to a class continue to play a key role in keeping the class fractured. How is the new Indian middle class defined? According to Eric Wright, middle class is not a true class, but it is a contradictory location within class relation. He argued that the middle classes are highly fractionalized and layered and have a very contradictory relationship to capitalism, while at the same time they are allied to the capitalist class. Other scholars emphasize upon the relative autonomy of the middle classes from the capitalist class. Pranav Bardhan argued that these classes occupy a strategic location in the economic and political spheres of the country. Unlike the old middle class or the petty bourgeois, who is oriented more towards the working classes, the new middle classes are one of the dominant propertied classes. Rudra, using a Marxian framework, considered the intelligentsia along with the industrial capitalists and landlords as a ruling class. The intelligentsia consisted of the following strata: all white-collar workers in the organized private sector, including clerks, drivers, sweepers, all public servants from the top to lower division clerks, excluding Group D of the public sector employees, peons, sweepers, etc. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers in the organized sector of private practice, writers, journalists, artists, advertisement industry professionals in both sectors, professional politicians, trade union leaders. Sridharan suggests that the occupational function and employment are the two important criteria for defining middle class. The marking factor is the division between manual and non-manual work, with typical middle class occupations being non-manual. From the point of interest of an economic and marketing specialist, in order to get a precise estimate, middle classes in India have often been defined by economic criterion alone based on the annual household income, as often done by National Council of Applied Economic Research. The estimation could be attained by using a combination of various educational and consumption criteria. The estimation reveals a peculiarity that there are people from middle classes in India who cannot afford a car or even a washing machine or spend holidays abroad but can enjoy the luxury of having a servant at home. This shows that defining a middle class in India is a difficult task, because defining it strictly by the criteria of consumption too misses out the fact that using the criteria as a social category. Middle class in India thus are both symbolic and local. As such, there is no official definition of the middle class. According to the World Bank and other sources, middle classes in India comprise 1 million to approximately 300 million. According to a report by the Asian Development Bank, the middle class in India could rise to about 1.2 billion mark in the next 2 years if the current economic growth is sustained. It is thus important to understand how urban India is changing. It is a complex picture where both the cities and the towns are redefining themselves in terms of new forms of urbanism. What is then the picture of this complexity? The rapid socio-economic changes in the cities, along with increase in the growth of small towns, have become the symbols of modernity, such as institutes for computer training, internet, telephone booths and satellite dishes, including a high technologically driven globalizing economy, presents a highly complex social reality. The complexity is further complicated by the growth of middle class housing complexes and malls and newer models of cars, every day replacing the earlier sign of high class symbol ambassador, where the larger metropolises such as Mumbai seek the status of global cities. What is clear within this complexity is the growth of urban middle class who assertively claim a national visible role as agents of globalization in India. Savala argues that we need to recognize that there is a growing significance of the urban middle class in the local, national and transnational imagination of globalization in the 21st century, where significantly middle class is shaping contemporary politics and economy in India. The close link between the implementation and economic reforms and the rise of new middle class in contemporary India initiated since 1990s have been accompanied by an array of visual images and public discourses that have centered on the shifting role of the middle class and their attitudes, lifestyles and consumption practices. What are these images? Advertisement of cell phones, cars, washing machines, branded foods, branded goods, foreign vacations, all catering to the middle class reflect the rising wage levels of managerial staff of multinational companies, emerging middle class culture in India. This growing visibility of the new middle class embodies the emergence of a wider political culture, one that has shifted from older ideologies of the state-managed economy to a middle class-based culture of consumption, argues Fernandez. In the early years of independence, the symbols of development include large dams and factories. In the post-liberalization India, the symbols include cell phones, washing machines, television, especially goods that are not readily available during the earlier decades of state control market. Adding to this, while the earlier state socialist tendencies tended to depict villagers and workers as objects of development, the recent mainstream political discourse, argues Savala, increasingly portray urban middle class consumers as representative citizens of liberalizing India. The proponents of the economic liberalization portray the middle class as a group that is fundamentally tied to the success of economic reforms and assert that the middle class is a sizable market and is the idealized standard for the Indian nation that is finally competing in the global world, whereas the critics of liberalization highlight the negative social and cultural effects of consumerism, vulnerability of middle class to the excesses of consumerism, decreasing social responsibility, argues Burma. Finally, what Rajni Kothari refers to is the growing amnesia to poverty, where there is a gradual abdication of a broad ethical moral responsibility to the poor and to the nation as a whole. What is argued here is that one has perceived urban middle class as self-evident force of consumption and prime recipients of the benefits of liberalization. There is lack of sustained research on middle class leading to lack of adequate data. Why is that? Scholars writing about economic reforms and globalization have for most part tended to assume that middle class benefit uniformly from policies of economic liberalization. This perspective, argues Jyotka and Prakash, is simplistic because it ignores important internal differentiations between middle classes based on caste, ethnicity, language, region and gender. Further, the restructuring and privatization of the public sector units yield short-term gains to certain sections and thus cannot assume that all sections of the middle class will transition smoothly to new economy jobs. For example, technology-driven economy is not only seen in computer software professionals but also in the high number of self-employed computer training centers mushroomed all over towns in India. Therefore, as Savala argues, the new middle class is not the one homogeneous group. Individuals from varying social segments can acquire the kind of capital, education, skill, credentials, cultural resources that can provide them with access to membership in this distinctive middle class. The rise of a new middle class represents emerging political elite that is shaping responses to economic reform. Another important visible middle class consumer identity is the emergence of consumption patterns and lifestyles associated with newly available commodities as in urban space. The middle class develops new suburban aesthetic identities and lifestyle that seeks to display visual signs of poverty from public spaces. For example, gated communities such as Magarpatta city, Pune. Such a middle class practices provoke conflicts within the urban poor over the control of public spaces. Spatial practices produce conflict whether the street vendors sell their wares in the middle class neighborhoods, which is regulated within the discourse of privacy and safety, thus clearly linked to the rise of an assertive new middle class identity in the context of liberalization. Further, the street vendors represent the burgeoning working class service sector that has been observing workers from manufacturing sectors such as textile industry that have experienced economic decline in the face of global competition. The middle class in India is thus in the ongoing classification struggle. Against the Indian background, the struggle of the middle class is about belonging or acceptance. Along with that, the new middle class is featured with the commodity consumption. Under the arc of new economy and globalization, the urban middle class are seen to be receiving material benefits of jobs. The new middle class takes the pride of increasing service sector where women's presence is increasingly specifically. The urban women are seen in the forefront of benefits of employment opportunities. Thus, this new middle class under a neoliberal paradigm is capable of creating a new public sphere. This class acts as a melting pot in India where structural constructs of gender redefines and restructures it. Section 4. Working class and the working class movements in India. According to the encyclopedic meaning of working class, we understand that this section of society does not possess the means of production and is forced to sell the labor power to those who own the means of production, argues Nathan. A. Desai states that in India, people from the first few generations of working class happen to be pauperized peasants and ruined village artisans who have suffered from the village backwardness and migrated to cities and became workers. The working class in modern India is the offshoot of modern industry, transport and plantations, modern factories, mining industries and transport established in India during the British period. In his discussion on working class, Desai has marked that while middle class people in India are basically propertyless, more militant in the outlook, more involved in the power-driven machinery than any other peasants, it is divorced from modern means of production. Dev Nathan, in his work on the structure of working class in India, has classified the working class in India into 4 broad categories. Those who get more than the value of labor power, who get a wage reasonable to meet the cost of production and reproduction of labor power, those who get a wage more or less to cover the immediate cost of production of the labor power but has to depend on non-capitalist sector in order to reproduce itself, and 4 who are unable to meet the cost of production of the labor power. The composition of this working class in India is further affected by certain social factors such as caste, gender and ethnicity. Sociologists have recently explored the area of working class movement by developing the discipline of industrial sociology. However, the study of working class has been in India largely confined to industrial development, to the growth and activities of trade unions rather than collective mobilization for direct action of workers. Like other sections of society, industrial workers of both organized and unorganized sectors resort to various types of collective actions such as strikes, satyagrahas, hunger strikes, bands and hartal, gheraos, demonstrations and all cutting off supply of electricity, etc. Strike by industrial workers in the industrial sector began with the early phase of modern industrial development. Period prior to 1918 had witnessed few spontaneous and unorganized strikes. However, the period post 1918 has witnessed the outbreak of a series of strikes of the Indian working class throughout the country in places like Mumbai, Kanpur, Kolkata, Calcutta, Sholapur, Jamshedpur, Chennai and Ahmedabad. By the end of the 20s and the beginning of 30s, the working class supported the freedom struggle of India and participated in meetings and organized demonstrations and processions against the British Raj. Desai argues that it was during this period that trade unions started to form in various parts of the country. Post 1927, the Indian working class began to evolve as a greater political force, especially in terms of an independent class program. During the years of 1928 to 30, Bombay textile workers called forth the biggest economic strike. Workers of Mumbai, Sholapur, Kolkata, Hyderabad and other places went on a strike to support the civil disobedience movement. The workers of Ahmedabad went on a total strike to protest against the arrest of Mahatma Gandhi. Post 1938 period witnessed a rapid development of trade union organization affiliated to All India Trade Union Congress throughout the country. The workers supporting the Communist Party launched strikes in the mid-50s as a form of political struggle. During the post-independence period, the strikes are greater in number on non-economic issues than on economic issues. Backward classes and backward classes movement. What does the term backward classes mean? Where in the social stratification system does the position of the backward classes is placed? Does the term also imply the existence of forward classes? In answer to all above mentioned questions, K.L. Sharma states that the term backward classes majorly includes weaker section of the people in the society, particularly scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other backward classes. The category includes people who are in need of social protection and help for economic and social upliftment. Actually, the caste and occupations of the people are the two structural criterion which we use to define the term backward classes. In terms of the caste hierarchy, there are people who are intermediate and functionally clean caste, but should be clear in our mind that people from backward classes are considered inferior to twice-born caste. According to Andre Bete, peasant caste forms a core of backward classes who are certainly far behind from upper caste in terms of various fields like education, government jobs, etc. In the book Social Structure and Change by K.S. Sharma, we find the mention of an interesting fact that there is no uniform meaning of backward classes at the national level. Before 1948, there was no category of backward classes. The government set up a commission to organize a study on whom to categorize backward classes among Hindus and Muslims on the basis of certain standards like educational, social and economic marginalization. Sharma argues that backwardness is considered as an attribute of a group and not an individual. The Constitution of India states that social and educationally backward classes of India comprise the backward classes in India. The government of India has rejected the recommendation of Kaka Kalekar Commission's sole criterion of using caste as a unit of determining the economic and educational backwardness. The centre also could not conclude on a uniform criterion to determine the backwardness and thereby left the states free to develop their own criterion in enlisting the backward groups. At the end, we observe that whatever may be the ways that states have adopted to define backwardness of the citizens of India, they all have agreed to the principle of reservation and jobs for the people from the backward classes as per the direction of Supreme Court in India based on the Mandal Commission. In order to enjoy this kind of privilege, from time to time it has been observed that many caste groups want to be categorized as backward classes in India. For example, the Lingayats and Vokkaligas in Karnataka, the Reddis and Kamas in Andhra Pradesh, the Nayars in Kerala, Nadas and Vaniyas in Tamil Nadu, Kurmis, Ahirs and Koris of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar exert pressure in order to continue to be recognized as backward classes of India, but paradoxically want to claim higher cultural, social and ritual statuses. Sharma argues that the backward class movement never have been such successful in northern India as they have been in the southern India due to the reaction of upper caste in the north against backward class movement. It is a matter of fact that before independence, upper caste used to dominate Indian society, while after independence, the backward classes started movements in order to capture the political power and socio-economic upliftment. The two most prominent backward classes movement in India so far are Jyoti Phule's movement in the Bombay Presidency during the years 1817 to 1930 and the anti-Brahmin Nadar movement in Chennai. So here we clearly observe one very important fact that often the term class system has a functionary role to play in the complex caste system in India. Thereby, the next section will deal in further detail with the intersections between caste and class in India. Following the Weberian scheme, sociologists have studied social stratification under three major categories: class, status and power. In the Indian context, it is significant to remember that caste, class and power intersect with each other, shaping the manner in which they determine the lives of the poor. As Dumo argues, caste hierarchy can allow economics or politics to enter surreptitiously. Thus, our understandings of social stratification must not be governed principally by the notions of hierarchies of order and conformity. Otherwise, social conflict involving caste, class and politics will remain outside the purview of social stratification. It is also evident in M. N. Srinivasa's monograph on Rampura village that if members are of the dominant caste, then they must also be economically well off and politically well represented in terms of numbers. Here also we find that caste, class and power interact with the sources of social dynamism and help in activating the changes. Drawing from the works of Andre Bete, one finds that he has theorized about the shift in the traditional power alignments from the traditional elite to the non-Brahmins in order to uphold the fact that how caste, economic class and power interact. With regard to caste, class and power, even Pradeep Bose in the Spectrum of Bihar emphasized that caste alignments do not follow a strict hierarchical order and this order is meant for change depending upon the existential conditions of class and power practiced in that community. The picture of the Halpatis of South Gujarat portray even more cumbersome relations between caste and class orientations. Even among the tribals such as the Halpatis of Gujarat, Beman study reveals that these Halpatis are neither full-fledged Hindus nor they are real Adivasis. For several centuries, they are found to occupy the lowest rank in the agrarian class structure. They are the untouchables in the village and are pauperized landless laborers. They are a group of people deprived, politically exploited and socially ignored to a certain extent that they can hardly hope to climb up the ladder of social mobility. The study of tribals of Chota Nagpur region also detects the myth of the practice of an egalitarian society among the tribes. It has been found that the economic differentiation on the basis of the political differentiation has already been there among these tribes. Leela Fernandez also analyzes the caste dynamics within the new middle class. She argues that the nature of the new middle class has had a paradoxical quality of being both fluid and structured. For example, within the labor market, the middle class individual's access to new economic jobs rests upon both his or her ability to access certain forms of social and cultural capital and also on inequalities and identities such as caste and gender. Studies on caste and labor market show that though there has been a change in the composition of middle classes, caste continues to play a role in creating stratification within caste, argue Sheth and Sridharan. According to Sheth, survey research showed that majority of white-collar jobs were held by upper caste with the least held by Dalits. In another study, it was found that the percentage of upper caste constituted the middle class had reduced and given way to dominant caste. The survey also revealed that an increasing number of lower caste and other minority groups were also beginning to join ranks of the middle class, argues Sridharan. Conclusion: the gap in income among various social groups worldwide is increasing phenomenally. In India, capitalism causes suffering to the working class so much so that it is noticeable for the so-called middle class white workers employed to be included within this working class. This is because they too produce surplus value for the capitalist. Again, it is distinct from the truth of the fact which lies inside focusing on mass culture as an expression of the bourgeois value. According to Marx, in a capitalist society, culture is mere tool in the hands of the capitalist, and culture industry is an apparatus and a fusion of work and leisure. According to Gary Day, the nature of amusements found there in the video games is nothing but the training in the use of technology which is favorable for the development of capitalism. So in today's world too, both work and leisure reinforce each other to continue and promote the values of capitalism. Culture industry is a fusion of the value of individualism of the middle class and the value of the group of the working class. Thus, this culture industry, according to Day, is an artificial synthesis. Moreover, this culture industry is a symbol of the triumph of bourgeois. In India, the challenge lies in the fact that we no longer define class in terms of production alone. We have to relate it to the patterns of consumption. Thus, analyzing class calls for understanding of connection between economic arrangement of society, cultural expression of it, particularly its relation to caste, ethnicity, religion, region and gender. At the end of this debate on class in India, we need to understand it that conceptualizing class only in terms of production would lead to a distorted and a very narrow understanding of class. In recent times, we have to understand class according to the whole issues of consumption also. Further, in order to understand class, we need to understand it within the intersections of class, caste, religion, region, gender, ethnicity, sexuality and whole issues of identity. It is also very important to understand that the whole notion of the manner in which classes operate in India differs historically and also contextually. Thank you.